Hi everyone, my name is Claire Holloway. I'm 34 years old. My parents told every employer I had a criminal record. I spent 8 months sleeping in my car while my father kept texting, "Come home, apologize, and maybe I'll stop." And then, one rainy Tuesday, a woman in a navy coat knocked on my motel door and told me my grandmother had been preparing for this exact moment for 10 years. The motel room smelled like bleach, wet carpet, and the kind of air conditioning that never quite stops humming even when it should. I was sitting on the edge of the bed, eating crackers out of the sleeve because I was trying to make $12 last until Friday. My shoes were still damp from the storm outside. My phone was face down on the table because I already knew what would be on the screen. Dad. Always Dad. Not calls. Texts. He liked texts because texts looked calmer later. That morning, he had sent 3. "You've made this hard on yourself. Come home and apologize, maybe then I'll tell people the truth. That was his favorite word for a lie he repeated often enough to hear as fact. What he was telling people was that I had a criminal record, that I had a history, that I had stolen from the family, gotten into trouble, and was too unstable to trust around money, customers, or staff. He never said it the same way twice. He was smarter than that. He said just enough to poison a room and leave before the questions got too specific. I know because I watched it happen. The first job I lost was at a dental office. I had been there 3 weeks. Front desk. Nothing glamorous, but steady hours. Health insurance after 90 days. And a manager named Paula who liked me enough to start teaching me billing codes. Then one afternoon she called me into her office and wouldn't meet my eyes. "Claire," she said. "Someone called with some concerns." I already knew. You could tell by the way people shifted when they were about to destroy your life politely. "What kind of concerns?" She hesitated. "They said there may have been legal issues in your past." I actually laughed, not because it was funny, because for 1 second it felt too ridiculous to survive daylight. "There weren't." "I understand." She folded her hands. "But until this is cleared up, I don't think this is the right fit." That was the beginning. After that, it kept happening. A bookstore, a bakery, a property office, a payroll assistant job I thought I finally had until the hiring manager stopped returning my emails 2 days after asking for my start date confirmation. Sometimes I got fired after a week. Sometimes the offer vanished before day 1. Sometimes I could feel it happen in real time. The smile cooling, the pause on the phone, the sudden, "We decided to go another direction." At first, I thought it was bad luck. Then my father texted me one night at 11:17, "You can keep pretending you don't need us, but nobody hires trouble forever." I stared at that message for so long, my phone dimmed. That was the moment I knew. Not suspected. Knew. I called my mother the next day because some idiot part of me still believed she might be the exit door in that family. She answered on the 4th ring, already tired. "Mom," I said, "is Dad contacting my jobs?" Silence. Then the soft exhale she used whenever she was about to translate cruelty into something that sounded almost reasonable. "Claire, your father is hurt." "Hurt enough to tell people I'm a criminal? You know he doesn't mean it like that." "How does he mean it?" Another silence. That was my mother's greatest talent. She could make truth feel rude just by refusing to hold it. Finally, she said, "If you would just come home and stop being stubborn, this could all calm down." There it was. The price. Not justice. Not clarification. Submission. Because this had never really started with jobs. It started 6 months earlier, the night I refused to lie for my sister. My younger sister, Emily, had always been the center daughter. Pretty, charming, permanently forgiven. The kind of woman who could wreck a room and still have everybody asking if she was okay. She had borrowed money from relatives, lied about bills, bounced from one fresh start to another, and somehow still got described as sensitive, overwhelmed, misunderstood. Then she got caught taking cash from the register at my father's hardware store. I saw it. Happen. Not all at once, in pieces, drawer shortages, inventory that didn't line up. Then one night, I walked back into the office after locking the side entrance and saw Emily stuffing 20s into her purse while my father stood there looking at her like a man deciding which daughter was more useful. He chose fast. "Close the door," he told me. I remember the fluorescent light buzzing overhead. Emily crying instantly. My father already building the story. "She made a mistake." I said, "She's been stealing." He looked right at me and said, "No. She was covering a personal emergency. And if anyone asks, you made a counting error last week that explains the discrepancy." I actually stepped back. "You want me to take the blame?" My father's face hardened. "I want this family protected." Emily wouldn't even look at me. That was the night everything split open. I said no, a plain no, calm, final. By the end of the week, I was out of the store. By the end of the month, my father was telling relatives I had become unreliable, then difficult, then unstable. And somewhere along the line, unstable turned into trouble with the law because that version frightened employers faster. When I could not keep a job, I lost my apartment. When I lost my apartment, I slept in my car. 8 months of parking lots, truck stops, cheap gym showers, and trying to look normal in interviews while your whole body feels like a bruise. 2 weeks before the motel, I woke up with condensation on the inside of the windshield and cried because I had dreamed I was back in a real bed, and for 1 second after waking up, I had believed it. Then came the knock on the motel door. 3 soft taps. I thought it was management. Instead, when I opened it, there was a woman in a navy coat holding a leather portfolio and a small black lockbox. She looked to be in her 50s. Steady eyes, rain on her shoulders, the kind of face that did not waste expressions. "Claire Holloway?" "Yes." "My name is Judith Dane," she said. "Your grandmother hired me 10 years ago in case this ever happened." I just stared at her. My grandmother, Eleanor, had been in assisted living for almost a year and a half. My parents controlled who saw her. I hadn't been allowed near her in months. Judith lifted the lockbox slightly. "She told me if your father ever tried to bury you," she said, "I was to find you, hand you this, and tell you to open it alone." I did not invite her in right away. Not because I thought she was lying, because when you spend 8 months being hunted through whispers and phone calls, your body forgets how to trust anything that arrives politely. Judith seemed to understand that. She stood under the motel overhang with rain ticking off the edge behind her and held the lockbox like it was a legal fact, not a dramatic prop. "She told me you'd hesitate," she said. "My grandmother told you that?" "She told me your first instinct would be caution. She said that was one of the few things your father had given you that might actually save your life." That sounded like Grandma, sharp even in absentia. I stepped aside and let her in. The room suddenly felt even smaller with another person in it. She did not sit until I did. Another thing I noticed: people who mean to control you usually claim furniture first. She put the lockbox on the table between us and opened the leather portfolio. Inside were copies of letters, old business cards, and a yellow legal pad with dates written in neat, black ink. "I'm a private investigator," she said. "Your grandmother retained me 10 years ago after your father tried to pressure her into changing her estate paperwork." I stared at her. My grandmother hired an investigator because of my father? She hired me because she had one son who confused power with ownership, and one granddaughter she thought might eventually need proof more than comfort. That hit harder than I expected. Judith slid the first document toward me. It was a copy of a retainer agreement with Grandma's signature at the bottom. Eleanor Holloway. Strong. Deliberate. Not confused. Not fading. Hers. My parents told everyone she wasn't thinking clearly anymore. Judith gave me a flat look. That story became useful much later than the date on that signature. I looked at the lockbox again. "What's in it?" "Your grandmother never told me. She only said it was For you, and that if I ever had to deliver it, I should first confirm whether your father had started isolating you professionally. My throat went dry. You knew about that. She opened the yellow pad and turned it toward me. There were names, employers, dates, notes. Call placed from Holloway hardware office line, reference warning to hiring manager. Legal issues, second call from personal mobile. Would not trust around cash. Message to apartment leasing office, eviction risk/family fraud history. For 1 second, I could not breathe right, because misery is one thing, documented sabotage is another. Pain you can survive, proof rearranges you. I traced 6 calls directly, Judith said, 3 more indirectly through relatives or business contacts, enough to establish a pattern. My father did all this. He and, in 2 cases, your mother. That one hurt worse. Not because I had believed my mother was innocent, because some childish part of me had still hoped she might have limited herself to silence. Judith slid over 1 more sheet, a printed screenshot of a message from my father's number to a guy named Rick Donlin. If she applies there, tell them there are theft concerns. She's unstable and retaliatory. Don't mention me. I looked at the text until the words blurred. Then I said, "Why didn't you find me sooner?" "I did," she said quietly. "Twice." I lifted my head. "Your father changed addresses faster than your records updated. Then you dropped off formal housing entirely. Your grandmother's health declined around the same time. I stayed on you as long as I could, but once you were in your car, you became harder to locate." Something in me softened then. Not because the situation got better, because for the first time in months, someone in this story had actually been trying to find me for my sake. Judith tapped the lockbox lightly. She told me there would come a point where apology would be too small and evidence would be necessary. She believed in timing. I laughed once, exhausted. That also sounds like her. The key was taped under the box. Of course it was. Grandma never trusted obvious hiding places. I peeled it free with fingers that had suddenly gone clumsy and slid it into the tiny lock. The lid opened with a soft metallic click. Inside was a folded letter, 2 cashier's checks, a small ring of keys on a brass tag, and a sealed envelope marked in Grandma's handwriting. Claire. Read this first, then called Judith back in. I looked at Judith. She stood immediately. "I'll be outside." When the door shut behind her, the motel room went so quiet I could hear the air conditioner rattle. I unfolded Grandma's letter. The first line made me cry before I reached the second. If you are reading this, then your father has finally done what I always feared. He has tried to make survival look like guilt. I wiped at my face and kept reading. Grandma wrote that she had watched my father choose Emily over truth for years because Emily fed his need to be needed, while I threatened it every time I refused to lie for him. She wrote that my mother would never stop him because comfort had always mattered more to her than courage. She wrote that if he ever turned the world against me, I was not to beg my way back into the house. Then came the part that changed everything. 10 years earlier, after my father tried to pressure her about the estate, Grandma had opened a separate account, bought a small property in another county through a trust, and placed access instructions in the box in case I ever needed to disappear from him without vanishing from myself. The brass keys were for the cottage. The cashier's checks were enough to get me there and keep me breathing while I got back on my feet. And the sealed second envelope? That one, she wrote, was for my father, only after I decided whether I wanted to save myself quietly or make sure he could never do this to me again. I sat there for a full minute with Grandma's letter in my hands, the motel air humming around me, and realized I had been given something far bigger than money. Not rescue, proof. When Judith came back in, I handed her the letter with both hands because mine had started shaking again. "There's a second envelope for my father," I said. She nodded once. "Then you've reached the part where you decide whether you want distance or consequence. I looked at the black lockbox, at the keys, at the cashier's checks, at 10 years of my grandmother preparing for the exact kind of cruelty my father had finally chosen. Then I said, I want him to stop. Judith did not smile. She just opened her portfolio again and pulled out one final document I had not seen yet. An attorney contact, Harold Bain, Elder Law and Civil Litigation. He already has a copy of the file, she said. Your grandmother didn't believe in single points of failure. That made me laugh through tears. Of course she didn't. By noon the next day, I was sitting in Harold Bain's office with the entire packet spread across the table. My father's texts, the traced calls, the dates, the employer notes, the message where he told someone to warn a business about theft concerns. My own phone lit up twice while Harold read, Dad, then Mom. I silenced both. Harold finished the last page, folded his hands, and said, Your father didn't just try to control you. He interfered with your employment, housing, and reputation through knowingly false statements. And this text, he tapped the screen capture of come home, apologize, and maybe I'll stop. Turns it from family cruelty into leverage. Can I stop him? He looked at me over his glasses. Yes. That word nearly broke me, because for months my life had felt like a hallway with no door at the end of it. Every interview, every fake smile, every lost job, every night in my car had trained me to think survival was all I was allowed to ask for. Now suddenly, there was another option. By that afternoon, Harold had sent a demand package to my father and mother. Not emotional, precise. Immediate cessation of defamatory contact, preservation of all business and personal phone records, formal correction letters to every employer or landlord they had contacted, notice of potential civil action if they continued. He also sent a separate notice to Holloway Hardware's outside accountant requesting preservation of records related to the original register discrepancies that had triggered the whole thing with Emily. That part was Judith's suggestion. Liars get sloppy when they have to protect more than one lie at once, she said. She was right. My father called 14 times that night. I let every call go to voicemail. The 10th one was the useful one. He was furious enough to forget caution. You ungrateful little idiot, he snapped. After everything we did to clean up your mess, you're threatening me? I made a few calls to keep you from embarrassing this family further. That's all. You want a job so badly, come home and act right. I saved that voicemail. Then I backed my car, my whole life at that point, out of the motel lot and followed Judith to the cottage my grandmother had bought years earlier. It was small, white siding, green shutters, one porch chair and a second one folded against the wall. Not fancy, not dramatic, but it was mine. Or close enough to mine that when I stepped inside and saw clean sheets, a stocked pantry, and a handwritten note from Grandma tucked beside the lamp. A house feels different when nobody inside it is waiting to use your need against you. I had to sit on the edge of the bed and cry into both hands. 3 days later, Judith took me to see Grandma. That was the part I had not let myself imagine too hard. She was thinner than I remembered. Smaller, too. But her eyes were clear, and when she saw me in the garden room of the assisted living center, she did not look confused. She looked relieved. Well, she said, you found the box. I knelt beside her chair and took her hands in mine. For a second, neither of us spoke. Then I said, You knew. She squeezed my fingers. I knew your father would forgive theft before he forgave a witness. That sentence hit so hard I had to look away. I'm sorry I didn't get to you sooner, I whispered. You got here, she said. That's enough. It wasn't, not really. I wanted years back, a different family, a life that hadn't been dragged through parking lots and motel rooms because I refused to lie for Emily. But sitting there with my grandmother's hand over mine, I understood something simple and brutal. Some love saves you early. Some love saves you late. Both count. My father arrived at the facility 2 days after that. Not by accident. Harold's letter had reached him. The voicemail had Probably embarrassed him in hindsight. The accountant notice had scared him, and somewhere in all that panic, he learned I had seen Grandma. So he came charging into the lobby like volume still meant power. I was there with Judith. He barely looked at her. "Are you trying to destroy this family?" he demanded. I stood up. "No," I said. "You did that when you chose Emily and called it protection." He pointed at me in the middle of the lobby. "You were supposed to take the hit and move on. That's what decent daughters do." Judith, beside me, went very still. So did I. Because once the truth says itself out loud, there is almost nothing left to argue about. The receptionist heard it. A nurse heard it. And behind us, from the doorway to the garden corridor, my grandmother heard it too. Her voice, when it came, was old but sharp enough to cut glass. "Daniel." My father turned. Grandma was standing with one hand on her walker and murder in her eyes. "Get out!" He stared at her. She lifted her chin. "You lied on one granddaughter to protect the other, and now you come here shouting? Get out before I let the whole building hear what kind of son you are." I had never seen my father look small before. That was the first time. He left without another word. Everything cracked after that. The accountant's review turned up what I always knew was there. Emily had been stealing from the store for over a year, small amounts, repeatedly. My father had covered shortages, shifted records, and used me as the explanation when things started looking ugly. Once Harold's preservation request landed, the hardware store's business partner pulled the books harder than my father expected. Emily was gone within a week. My father was forced out 2 weeks later. No parade, no cinematic arrest scene, just the kind of administrative disgrace that stains a man longer than shouting ever could. His business partner bought out his share at a loss, and the story spread exactly the way he used to spread mine. Quietly, locally, and with enough truth attached that nobody could save him with tone. My mother tried to call it a misunderstanding. No one listened. As for me, one of the employers Harold corrected, the property office, called and asked if I would consider interviewing again. Paula from the dental office sent an apology email so sincere I cried reading it. I took the property office job, steady hours, clean desk, a paycheck with my name on it that no one could contaminate afterward without consequences. Grandma lived another 7 months, long enough to sit on the cottage porch with me twice, long enough to tell me I was never difficult, only inconvenient to people who needed me powerless, long enough to watch me sleep in a real bed again, go to work again, buy groceries without counting quarters first. When she died, it hurt in the cleanest way grief can hurt, without confusion. She left me the cottage outright, no tricks, no hidden conditions, just a note in her final letter that said, "I did not save this for you because I thought you were weak. I saved it because I knew one day you would choose truth, and truth is expensive in the wrong family. My father sent one message after the fallout. I hope you're happy now." I looked at it for a long time. Then I blocked his number. Because happiness was not the word for what I felt. It was something steadier. A bed that was mine. Work that was mine. A front door no one could use against me. And the knowledge that when my father tried to make survival look like guilt, my grandmother had already built me a way out, and a way back to myself. Hi, everyone. Thank you for being here. If that had happened to you, would you have opened the second envelope and gone after the truth, or taken the cottage and disappeared quietly? And after learning your own parents tried to make you unemployable just to force you home, would you ever speak to them again? Tell me in the comments. And if this story stayed with you, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. I'd love to see you in the next one.